Well, it took an awfully long time, but at the tail end of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, chapter 664, barely more than 20 chapters from the end of Bleach itself, Kisuke Urahara finally revealed his long-awaited Bankai, Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame. Fans had been speculating intensely about what Urahara's Bankai was for over a decade. Benihime, after all, is not as easily quantifiable as something like Ryujin Jaka or Hyorin Maru. Its powers are slightly more mysterious. We know that it can use energy to do all manner of things, from firing blasts to creating shields to even building explosives. So as to what its Bankai could do, people could only guess. But eventually, Kubo finally gave it to us. So in this video, I want to talk about Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame, what it can do, what its abilities are, what its themes are, and overall why I think it's one of my favourite Bankai in the entire series and why it's absolutely perfect for Kisuke, the guy with the unknown means. Before we get started, however, guys, I'm 1,500 subs away from 30,000, which is incredible. If you want to help me get to that milestone, I would really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate the support, and it does help with the YouTube algorithm as well. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all of my videos. Follow me on Twitter to become part of the wider community. It's a really good way of getting in touch with me to talk about Bleach. And also in the description below, you'll find a link to our Discord, which you can join to become a part of the community there as well. So it took an awfully long time to get there, but we did eventually see Urahara's Bankai. Pushed into a corner by Sturmiter D. Askin Naklavar, Kisuke activates his Bankai Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame to turn the tables against his enemy. Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame takes the form of an enormous mannequin-like woman who looms behind Kisuke, her colossal wooden arms surrounding him as if in a protective embrace. Now, I would assume that this woman is supposed to be Benihime, his Zanpakuto spirit, the Crimson Princess, but there's no denying that Kannonbiraki Benihime's roots and its themes are very much steeped in Buddhist history. Now, you may remember, if you were reading this on a weekly basis, that when Kisuke's Bankai was first revealed, its name was originally Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame, a slight mistranslation which does essentially mean the same thing. Guanyin is the Chinese name for Kannon, which is known in Buddhism as the goddess of mercy. This woman is featured heavily throughout Japan and other Asian countries, appearing in Buddhist temples all across the continent, statues that you've probably seen before. Known as the goddess of mercy and compassion, Kannon is a bodhisattva, which again is something I've probably completely butchered. But what it essentially means is that she stayed away from enlightenment in order to help people with their suffering and ensure that she could help as many people as she possibly could. She's known to many as the Divine Mother, which I think would explain why it looks like she is shielding Kisuke in some kind of motherly embrace. He definitely does appear to be quite far back towards her when she first appears, and I think that would make an awful lot of sense. And I think her ability, the simple power that essentially allows her to perform any task, which is something we'll get into in a minute, is a reflection of Senju Kannon, which is the Kannon with 1,000 arms, 1,000 implements, which allows her to see and hear all. And I think that's very much reflected in this Bankai's ability to essentially do everything. And I absolutely love this. The themes behind this Bankai, the way it's really steeped in Buddhism, so much of Bleach actually is, but this Bankai truly encompasses all of that, I think, in perhaps the most direct form, and I love it. I think it looks so good. Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame herself is very clearly artificial looking. She looks like a doll. There are obvious joints and wear and tear on her arms and her fingers. She does appear to be made of wood, as though she is a puppet. Now again, I absolutely love this theming. Kisuke is definitely a puppet master, and for him to be working with this enormous mannequin, there's definitely kind of a marionette vibe going on here. And we also even see the strings involved. When Kisuke attacks Askin, these stitches seem to follow him, and we know, of course, that Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame is all about warping reality with these stitches, and I just love that. I think the imagery surrounding this thing is so good, and really evocative of Kisuke's own personality as well, and his ability to be in control of almost any situation. Now, about the Bankai's ability itself, and what I absolutely love about this is that it's just so simple. It's one simplistic power that has a litany of applications, and I think that is so clever. It's one power, but then everything it can do stems from that single ability. So its one power is the fact that it can restructure anything it touches. That's literally it. That's what Kisuke's Bankai can do. However, because of that, it can do basically everything, and I think that is really, really clever. Now, Shikai and Bankai are supposed to link together, and on the surface it's definitely kind of hard to see how these two work together, but I think if you kind of take a step back, the Shikai itself does appear to be about deconstruction and also reconstruction of purely energy. Kisuke takes energy and can essentially do anything with it. He can create a shield, he can create explosives, he can fire off energy blasts, but he's also able to deconstruct things as well, such as when he uses his Shikai to simply cancel out Yami's Bala blasts. I think Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame is this, but blown up to infinite proportions, which again is really neat, and perfect for the guy who the Sternritter labelled as the man with unknown means. He can do anything at the drop of a hat, and the Bankai is reflective of this. In the battle with Askin, which is criminally short, the Bankai has very little fanfare, which I found to be a little bit disappointing actually. When it first appears in chapter 664, it appears immediately behind Kisuke after he says Bankai, and in the chapter following that, you get a little bit more. Askin definitely is like looking up at something in terror, but unfortunately that's about it, and I think that's very emblematic of the fact that Kubo was starting to have to rush things a little bit. Compare it to Kyoraku's Bankai, another highly anticipated one that we got merely about a volume beforehand, and there is so much setup and so much scene setting that Kisuke's one does look quite paltry in comparison, and it's a real shame. However, it does get a good showing throughout the unfortunately short fight, and there are 4 major abilities to talk about here that all stem from its power of restructuring. The first one is also perhaps the most confusing, I think, and this is the offensive ability to deconstruct things that step inside Kannonbiraki Benihime's range. When the Bankai is summoned, Askin's arm is immediately split in 2, as though it is being dissected surgically. There's no blood, and it appears to be that there is a void where his arm once was, but the split goes all the way down to the end of his thumb, and it does actually look pretty gruesome, to be fair. But it's also incredibly neat, as I mentioned a minute ago, as if it was done surgically. By backing out of the range, however, Askin's arm closes up again, and you see it sew itself back together. It's a really nice visual, but it is also probably the least explained part of this Bankai's power. How does it actually work, and what would happen if Askin stayed in that range? Would his whole body just unravel, or is it something that Kisuke can kind of direct? Did Kisuke think, just unravel his arm, or is it something that Kannonbiraki Benihime does on its own? Does this power hurt Askin, or is it merely there to terrify him? Again, it's difficult to say, because we don't see it again after that. The second major ability depicted by Kannonbiraki Benihime is its ability of healing through reconstruction. Now, the whole reason Kisuke summons his Bankai in the first place is because Askin has successfully blinded him with his ability Gift Ring. Gift Ring is potent in the fact that it actually forces a death state on things, so ideally these eyes are never coming back. However, when Kisuke activates his Bankai, its massive doll-like hands enclose over his face and begin working on his eyes. And again, this is a really, really cool visual that I wish Kubo had a bit more time to spend with, but we do get a really nice visual all the same, where the hands move back and they have fixed Kisuke's eyes. Again, the stitches are involved here, and it's actually really cool to see. They have basically sewn Kisuke's eyes back, and the stitches are now running along his face. It's really, really awesome, and I cannot wait to see this in the anime. And just like that, Kisuke's eyes are working perfectly again, and I have to wonder what the limits are of this reconstruction. If Kisuke were missing an entire arm, would it be able to just sew him back a new one? Again, it's impossible to say because we don't get to see it, but considering his eyes were essentially gone, I think it's probably very likely it definitely could do. The next ability showcased is actually probably my favourite one. I think it's perhaps the most creative application for this Bankai, and that's restructuring Kisuke himself to make him more powerful. So Kisuke locks blades with Askin at one point, and they're basically pushing against each other, but Kisuke holds his arm out as if to allow Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame to take it and make it something new. And you see his arm unravel briefly before being stitched back together again, and after this point he's able to successfully overpower Askin with very little difficulty. Again, the applications here are limitless, and I just love that. I love taking this idea of a really simple power and just being able to blow it out across multiple avenues. Basically, I mean, where does this thing stop? Can Kisuke restructure his legs to allow him to run incredibly fast or jump incredibly high? Can he restructure his bones to make himself nearly impossible to cut? Again, that's what I think is so cool about this Bankai and why it's so reflective of Kisuke. Kisuke is known as, along with characters like Miuri, someone who has an answer to everything. In a fighting situation, you know, he's always got a way out, and I think this Bankai reflects that perfectly. It reflects perfectly his on-the-fly nature, his ability to adapt immediately, and adaptation is, again, I would say, a major theme of this Bankai. So seeing him actually give his arm over to his Bankai mid-fight in the flow of battle to increase its strength was really nice to see. And the final ability we get to see from Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame is traversal. Kisuke can actually use this Bankai to create gateways, essentially, for people to move between. Now, how this works, again, is fuzzy. Is it an actual teleportation ability, or do people have to move through a physical tunnel? I personally think it's teleportation, because Grimmjow obviously appears behind Askin during their fight, and on the next panel, when Askin collapses to the ground, you can see what looks like a sort of doorway on the floor where Grimmjow maybe came through, almost like a Garganta. Again, I think this makes perfect sense, and to be honest, this is the ability that most showcases the Bankai's reality warping powers. Kisuke can quite literally create a hole in space-time for people to jump through and then make a new one for them to come out of on the other side. The only thing I'm a little bit confused about is how this actually works in relation to the Bankai's range. So we know from Askin's immediate deduction that Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame has a fairly small range that he's able to get out of quite quickly. So how then does Kisuke manage to create a doorway in the Gift Ball Deluxe despite being fighting Askin the entire time and not moving out of his sight? That one's a little bit weird, because the Gift Ball Deluxe appears after Kisuke has already arrived in the battle. Askin mentions that the Gift Ball Deluxe is impossible to escape from, but Kisuke guesses that it's not impenetrable, which is why he creates the doorway for Grimmjow to pop up behind Askin and finish him off. But it doesn't explain how that doorway gets there in the first place. That is a little bit weird. Maybe what happens is that when Kisuke heals Grimmjow before arriving on the battlefield, he uses his Bankai and creates a doorway and asks him to wait there until the opportune moment, but it still doesn't quite explain the doorway that Neliel uses to get in later on. The Bankai does seem to be intimately linked to Kisuke, as all Bankais are, and when Kisuke becomes so wounded by Askin's poison that he collapses to the ground, the Bankai crumbles to pieces behind him as well. And it's a really cool visual. It just seems to collapse dead behind him as though its strings have been severed, which of course they have. The strings to its puppet master Kisuke are now gone. And I think it's really dramatic, actually, because its head seems to come off as well. Like, it all just literally falls to pieces behind him. And what's interesting as well is when the Bankai collapses, the effects of it seem to wear off. Kisuke's stitches begin to reopen, blood comes gushing out of him, and he collapses to the ground. So I think the Bankai, I wonder if Kisuke were to pull the Bankai away himself, would they reopen? Would his injuries come back? Do his eyes disappear again? That's something I'm not sure about either. It does kind of look like maybe the irises are starting to fade, but again, you never get to see Kisuke again after that, which, you know, as you know, is a point of contention for me. But it is cool seeing the Bankai disappear behind him. It would have been interesting to see what happened to Kisuke himself if it was up to him to get rid of the Bankai. But it just goes to show how wounded he actually was. One thing I do want to point out before this video ends is how Kisuke mentions much earlier on in the series, back in the Urahara arc, when Chad wants to train with him, how he needs to train against a Bankai user, but even though he has a Bankai, he doesn't believe that his own one is particularly suitable for training. Now, I have to assume that Kubo either didn't know what Kisuke's Bankai was going to be at this point, or has changed his mind since then, because as far as I can tell, Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame is perfect for training. It's literally, it's kind of funny. It's the most perfect Bankai for training there could possibly be, because Kisuke can use it to power himself up to fight them again, so they can fight a stronger opponent. He can use it to power them up if necessary. He can use it to weaken them. He can use it to change the terrain. It's basically like it's like a settings menu in a game. Kisuke can essentially decide how he wants the fight to play out before it starts in a training situation. So I don't quite get that. I think Kubo must have changed his mind later on. But what we did get is really awesome. So that's it for the video on Kannonbiraki Benihime Aratame. Do you like Kisuke Urahara's Bankai? Do you think it fits him? As far as I'm concerned, it's one of my favourite in the series. I love that Kubo brought out the massive construct again, which we haven't seen for a little while, actually. And I just think it suits Kisuke absolutely down to the ground. It's really cool how it has multiple themes behind it. The themes of Buddhism, the themes of being a puppet master, and the themes of being able to just do anything and have numerous applications at your fingertips. I wish we could have seen more of it, but I cannot wait to see it in the anime. I think it's going to be really, really awesome, and I hope they give it the gravitas it deserves, and I hope that they give it the fanfare it deserves as well. I would have loved to have seen it like building itself behind Kisuke when it was summoned as opposed to just appearing out of nowhere. So I'm really hoping we get something like that. But that's it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed and found it useful. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about Kisuke's Bankai, but until next time, I'll catch you later. See you then.